he brought me to the east gate, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the east. And his voice was like the noise of many waters, and the earth did shine with his glory. And the glory of Yahweh came into the temple through the east gate. And the glory of Yahweh did fill the house. And I heard him speaking to me out of the house. And he said to me, Son of man, the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel, forever in the place of my holy name. Now show them the temple to the house of Israel. Show them the design of the temple and measure the pattern. Show them the form and the seat of the house and the fashion and the comings and goings. This is the Torah of the house upon the top of the mountain. The whole limit thereof round about shall be holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. As we continue our series on show the pattern, show the design, I want you to notice the great emphasis placed on dining rooms. Dining halls, as you see throughout, being highlighted in red. And these are placed in the northern portion of the temple, you see there. In the southern portion of the temple, lots of dining rooms and dining halls. Why? To keep the feast. In this presentation, we're going to talk about the feast of Yahweh in the Millennium. This is, of course, the millennial temple, and these are the dining rooms and halls. Many, for those that will keep the feast, that will have the great privilege of being in this close proximity to the temple to keep the feast of Yahweh. Now, as we look at the feast of Yahweh, it's very important that you understand how we got here, okay? Why are we doing this series? We're doing this series because the apostate church is, for the most part, completely ignorant of the millennium. And the fact that the decisions you make day in and day out determine where you will be in the future in the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ. That's why we're going through these details. We're showing you what it's going to be like, okay? Now, the reason we're doing that is because there's only so much room. Okay, when you look at the temple, you look at the building, you look at the dining halls, I mean, there's only so much room. There's only so many people you can fit there, okay? And keep in mind, these are the overcomers, but these are all the saints from old. They're all in this era of time, because the resurrection is taking place. So it's very important that we look at the feasts and see why the feasts are continuing and what feasts are discontinued in the millennium. Okay? Now, as we enter this millennium, as we enter this time, you'll notice in the intro it said, show them the pattern, show them the Torah, the law of the house. Now, This is a principle it's really important for you to understand. In the time that we're doing this, actually being instructed to share this with you, with the banners, with the veils, with everything, you know, remember that we're showing the pattern of the sanctuary. So the pattern of the sanctuary lists various items and various things that were in the sanctuary, one of which is the feast. And it's a principle that's so important for you to understand. It's the law of first mention. So what the law of first mention means is a principle or something is established. And the Most High gives his order, gives this way of going about things to establish instruction, establish teaching, establish how do we approach God. Remember what's happening is that at the end of the Bible, you have the book of Revelation, and the book of Revelation, you have New Jerusalem. Now, the Bible begins with the book of Genesis, and it begins with the Garden of Eden. So the process of the transition to bring us back to the Garden of Eden is expressed through the temple, through the tabernacle, okay? So that's what all those things are. Now, we enter another area of time where we still need 1,000 years before we enter the New Jerusalem. That's right. Many of you think that you're raptured, you go to heaven, you go to New Jerusalem. That's not how it works, guys. The whole purpose of this series is to show you that we need another 1,000 years. There's a whole other era, period of time a millennial 1,000 years, which is the seventh day since creation. You got 6,000 years, Adam till now, and then you have another 1,000 years, bringing us to 7,000 years, after which is New Jerusalem. Okay? All right, very important. But all these things that it lists here, we're going to go over them in this whole series. But we come to the feast. We come to the Sabbath. All right. So what's happened? Let's talk about what happened. Everything that happened in Exodus is a type and shadow of everything that's happening in our day, in the second coming Lord Jesus Christ. How does it work? The Most High brought the people out of Egypt. Okay, same thing. We're supposed to come out of Babylon. All right? Then what happens? It brings them through the wilderness. The woman travels through the wilderness, 1,260 days, okay? Same pattern, okay? And what happened? The Most High spoke. His voice was a voice of thunder. He came down in Mount Sinai on the mountain. He spoke what? The 10 Commandments. He spoke the 10 Commandments, and then he spoke what we're calling the law of first mention. So he gives them the temple, gives them all the instructions, gives them this information for them to do. Now what's happened is Moses is in the 40 days. So the Most High came down to Mount Sinai, and when he came down to Mount Sinai, it was 7 days after that, then Moses goes up to the mount and gets this instruction. So they just left Egypt, they kept the Passover, and it's a type and shadow of those that overcome in the last days that are entering the millennium. Do you understand that? So you got leaving Egypt, leaving Babylon, okay? We have to do all the same thing. And some of you might ask me, Leland, why are you telling us all this stuff? We're, we got the mark of the beast, we got all this stuff. Well, I'm telling you all this so you understand how to overcome. You're in a spiritual war, okay? You're not going to win this war by storing food. You're going to win this war by applying the blood of Jesus Christ to the doorposts of your house. The destroyer is going to pass over. You're going to overcome by keeping the Sabbath. If you keep the Sabbath, then you have the opportunity to enter the promised land. Okay? If you understand these feasts, you will understand how to face Yahweh. That's what it says. 3 times a year, you are to go up to Jerusalem, to the place by his name, to see the face of Yahweh. Yahweh is Alpha and Omega. Okay? And he instituted these feasts. So, what do we have? He speaks the 10 Commandments. The children of Israel are afraid. They say, Moses, we are afraid of God. You go up to that mountain, you talk to God, but don't let God speak to us, lest we die. Okay, Moses goes to the mountain, it's 30, 40 days. He comes down, and what happens? The golden calf. So once we get the golden calf, now we have a problem. Because after that golden calf, there are a succession of sins. Those sins change the original instruction. That's right. We can see that reflected in the feast. So, what happens is so you got Exodus 20, 10 Commandments, the Most High speaking the voice of thunder. Revelation 10, you got the angel of the covenant, and he speaks the 7 thunders. Okay, understand that? It's the same thing. When the Son of Man comes in the clouds with his angel, power and great glory. So the people won't hear from God directly, so they want someone to go between them. You go, Moses. And that's the same thing you guys are doing. I'm telling you, you can speak to him. You can hear his voice yourself. You don't need me. You don't need anyone else. I'm showing you the pattern. I'm showing you the way back to the Garden of Eden. So then we get to Exodus 23, and we get these instructions for the first time. Okay? Then it's instituted. Sabbath. Work 6 days, rest on the 7th day. The Jubilee, essentially. You sow, and then you let the land rest in the 7th year. And we get the feasts. Okay? Now when we get the feasts in Exodus 23, it says, you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, the feast of harvest, or the first fruits of your labors, or the feast of weeks, and the feast of ingathering. Okay, so we are instructed on 3 major feasts, okay, and the Sabbath. Well, this same principle we see in the millennial temple. And that's what we're going to go over in this video, is that these feasts continue, okay, but there's others that are discontinued. So let's talk about the ones that have discontinued, because this is very important for us. So so let's remember what happened. You got the golden calf. Then Moses has to go to the mountain another 40 days to intercede for them, because God was going to wipe them all out. So then he comes back down with the tables of stone again, and he's dealing with the people, and they begin to make the tabernacle. Now, as soon as the tabernacle is set up, like right within the 7 days, you get the strange fire. What's a strange fire? Well, Aaron is the priest, and he's got 2 sons, Nadab and Abihu, and they go into the temple. They offer strange fire. When they offer the strange fire, then we get the instructions for Yom Kippur. What is Yom Kippur? It's the one day of the year the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. We never knew how many times a year he could have done that. Because then there's a law instituted that says now you can only do this one time a year because your sons did strange fire. You understand that? So things throughout the Torah are not all the original intention. Yom Kippur is one. Okay, now, because of this, you can only come one day. A restriction is placed. So, then we get back to the millennium, okay? Now we don't have this restriction. Now the door of the Holy of Holies is open. It's not one time a year we can see the king. Now it's more, okay? You see that? So that's an example of a law, a feast even, is instituted because of the sins of the children of Israel. Because of what they did, now you can only go into the Holy of Holies one time a year. Now, when Christ came and he sacrificed himself, that restriction is removed. Okay, so now that restriction is removed. Yom Kippur has no New Testament after the first coming of Christ application for us. Okay? So this is why now some people say, Leland, are you Hebrew roots? No, I'm not Hebrew roots. I've never been Hebrew roots. Because the things I'm telling you, they don't accept. They just accept that everything is exactly so, but they don't understand that the sins of the children of Israel affected the Torah. Okay? So we have to pass the Torah through the cross, through what Christ did for us on our first coming. Now, as we enter the millennium, we have to do that again. We have to apply the feast, apply the Torah of the house, as you can see in the instruction, into this new era. Okay? So, at Christ's first coming, okay, you know after his first coming, after the cross, you no longer sacrifice a lamb on Passover. Okay? Then we see the same thing in the millennium. So, he completes himself the sacrifice of Passover. Okay? He completes for himself the sacrifice of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Okay? Those two are completed. Now, another feast, that's called the Feast of First Fruits, he completed. Okay? He completed as well. But we still do it. Why do we do it? Because first fruits is the resurrection. Now, once we get to the millennium, there's no first fruits. Okay? There's the Feast of Weeks, yes, but there's no first fruits. First fruits is a single day. It's the day after the Sabbath during unleavened bread. Okay? That is not in the millennium. Why? Because it's memorializing the resurrection. Okay, so yes, Christ is the first fruits of the resurrection. Okay? But that feast continues until it's fulfilled. When's it fulfilled? It's fulfilled in the resurrection. Okay? So once we get to the resurrection, the Feast of First Fruits is fulfilled. As well, okay, now these are there's 7 major feasts, guys, and there's 2 minor feasts, Hanukkah and Purim. Now, Hanukkah is fulfilled. It's an apocalyptic scenario. That's also fulfilled in the apocalypse. Okay? That's fulfilled in the apocalypse, so that does not continue into the millennium. Purim, okay? Well, that's the wedding supper. Okay, that's the Antichrist. That's the king coming. That's the king come, the revealing of Alpha and Omega. All right, so that's fulfilled. Because there's lots of feasts. Now, once we enter the millennium, one of the feasts we showed you in the previous video, that is every month the East Gate is open, okay, and it's a feast. It's a Moedim. It's every month, the first day of every month. Okay, so that's instituted. Now, that is a trumpet being blown. So that also replaces the Feast of Trumpets. So the Feast of Trumpets is not necessarily memorialized with great significance in the millennium. Why? Because the trumpets of Revelation were blown. Okay, now we go to the other side. So can you see how the apocalypse, the plagues that happened to Egypt, the children of Israel, went through that apocalypse. They came out into the wilderness to enter the promised land. All right, but they didn't. Only two did, right? Joshua and Caleb. So the story repeats itself in the apocalypse, right? So in the end days, the second coming of Jesus Christ, we have the plagues of Egypt. We have all these apocalyptic things happen. And then you have a millennial reign, okay? So all these things, all the things in the pattern of the sanctuary that Moses sees in those 40 days, we can see in the millennium. So the feasts are, again, now the major thing in the millennium is this. You had 3 feasts, okay? You got Passover, or unleavened bread. You have Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks, also called Shavuot. Okay, it's a little, if you look this up and you do a search on Google and you say, okay, what are the feasts in the millennium? They won't include that because it's hidden. But it's there. And then you have Tabernacles. Now, why do we have Tabernacles? Well, Tabernacles is also a progressive feast, okay? So to give us an idea of being a tabernacle, ourselves being the temple, okay? And then eventually in the resurrection receiving the glorified body. But it's still in the millennium. Why? Well, the final Tabernacles is fulfilled in New Jerusalem, where it says God himself will be their God. He will dwell, tabernacle, with them. Okay? So that is not fully fulfilled, fully completed until New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem is after the millennium. Okay? And then we still have, of course, the Sabbath. During the millennium, we have the Sabbath. We have the East Gate being open every Sabbath. We also have the Jubilee. Okay, so the Jubilee is called the year of release, and that's in Ezekiel Chapter 46 and verse 17. It says the year of liberty. Okay, so that's still going on. So that means that the cycle of 7 years, and you let the land rest, the cycle of the Sabbath, working 6 days, all that is the same. Now, we have some notes here. We're gonna go through the notes. But I really want you to really think about how we're entering this plagues of Egypt. We're entering this time. And these are things that we need to overcome, okay, in this time. That's why I'm doing this, guys. If you actually understand the message of what we're doing in this series, you can see this is how you overcome, okay? This is how are you going to deal with what's going on? And things are, I think, much worse than people realize. We'll get into that in the future. But the obvious feasts that are in the millennium is Tabernacles and unleavened bread, okay? The one that is less obvious is the Feast of Weeks. And I'll show. Now here is an app called Bible Hub. And in it, we can actually see something which is really helpful for us. If we look closely, what you'll notice is it will have the words in English It'll have the words in Hebrew, and then the way you like say the word in Hebrew. It's called a transliteration. So what we have is this verse 21, and it says, in the first month, on 4, or Arba, Aser, 10. So on 4, 10, or 14. It's another way of just saying 14. 14 day, Yom, of month, Kodesh, La Kodesh. You shall observe, or shall observe you, okay, Passover, Pesach. Okay, so Passover is the Pesach, the Passover. Now this is the part that I really want you to pay attention to show us that there's actually another feast here it's talking about. Now feast, you can see it says feast is Hag. That's the word Hag. So like if you're in Jerusalem and it's a feast time, they say Hag Samach. It's like happy holidays. Okay, Hag, feast. And then you can see the word 7. Now, normally the word 7 is Sabbath. Okay, but this is Shabbaot. Okay, and it's the word for weeks. So in the book of Daniel, when it talks about weeks, it's this word. When it talks about the Hag, feast of weeks, this is what it says, Hag Shavuot. So right here, what it's saying is Hag Shavuot. This is the feast of weeks. Okay? And then it says days, Yamim. Okay, days. Yam is day, mim, plural. Days. But what this is actually saying is this, most translations in English will say, okay, a feast 7 days. But this word, you would not use this word for 7 days. This word is Shavuot. It is the feast of weeks. So it's the feast, Hag, of Shavuot. Days, Yamim. And then it says unleavened bread. Okay? So that's why we're saying that the feast of Shavuot, Pentecost, okay, is actually in the Millennium. Throughout the series, I'm going to do my best to provide notes for all the content. I may even go back over some previous messages and have handwritten notes like this, so that way you can have the whole series in a PDF file and reference and understand how the progression of the messages is going. It makes a lot of sense once you see one message after the next. But, of course, what we're talking about here is the feasts and the Sabbaths in the Millennium. And we're just going to give you some basic words, guys, in Hebrew to understand. So you can see Ezekiel is the temple. So when we talk about Ezekiel, we're talking about Ezekiel Chapter 40 through 48, which is talking about the Millennium. And there it says the feast, the Hag, and then you have plural of that word Hag, which is Hagim. In the months, Kodesh, or Kodeshim. In the Sabbaths, and all the appointed times. So appointed times is singular Moed, or appointed times is Moedim. And these are the feasts. Okay? So when these words are used, Hag or Moed, these are talking about the feasts of Yahweh. And if you can see it on the side here, it says, 3 times a year you shall see the face of Yahweh. Now again, our English translations don't say that. They say you shall appear before. But again, if you look at the Hebrew, you'll see is Ra'ah, which means see, and face is Pananium, face of Yahweh. So that's God's great love and desire, is to feast, to go back to the Garden of Eden with us. Okay, and so these feasts are exciting times throughout the year that are memorialized for a story, for a message. Okay, so these are the three major feasts. So they don't go away in the millennium. They're memorialized. They continue. So we have Passover. Passover is also called unleavened bread. And again, in the time that we are in the apocalypse, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb. Okay, it's the blood of the Lamb. That's how we overcome. Revelation 12:11. Throughout this, we're going to show, because many of the apostate, ignorant Christians have no clue about these feasts, and they say, oh, that's Jewish, that's the Old Testament, that's finished. So we're going to show you everything in the New Testament where it talks about the feasts as well. But basically what we're doing in our notes is you'll see we have red. Red is the law first mentioned. Red is when Moses was in the 40 days the first time. Okay, you can see the verses in Exodus showing that. Then we have green. Green is in the millennium, and that is in Ezekiel. Various verses in Ezekiel Chapter 45 talk about these feasts. Okay, so they overcame by the blood of the Lamb. And then in Exodus, the Passover is seen in Exodus chapter 12, which gives you a lot of details. Guys, the purpose of this video is not to tell you every little detail of the feast. We have lots of other videos on that. We have a whole playlist on the feast. So if you have specific questions about the feast, what about this, what about that, please reference the playlist on the Sabbaths and on the feast. Okay, you will more than likely see in the title of the video the answer to your question. But the destroyer must pass over. That's why we're showing the blood on the doorpost, because that's the Passover lamb. The blood, he's been sacrificed for us. But you have to intentionally do it. Okay, you can't just think, okay, Christ just did everything to me, so, you know. But no, there's obvious plagues and things that are happening to Christians because they're not applying, they're not taking serious the work of Christ. Okay, so you have to understand these things and apply them to your life. So they shall eat unleavened bread 7 days. Okay? And this is in the first month, on the 14th day of the first month, to keep the Passover. Now, why is it unleavened bread? Unleavened bread means that you remove the leaven, you remove the sin, you remove the, Christ said, the leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of Herod. So you have to remove the sin, you have to remove the false doctrine. And every day, every year you do that intentionally, evaluating yourself, what, you know, kind of false teaching, what is going on, what is the leaven in my heart that I need to remove, okay? And we see this in Ezekiel 45:21. You shall keep the Passover, the Hag, Shavuot, Yomim days. So remember we saw that before. It's the Passover, but this is a different feast here. This is feast Hag, Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, Yomim days. But then it says, unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days of the feast or of the Hag. Now, if we go to the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 5:7 and 8, purge out the old leaven that you may be new dough, as you are unleavened. So it is you that has to be unleavened when Christ appears. We must be without spot or wrinkle. We must remove all the leaven and antichrist, false spirit doctrines and everything. We must remove them. For Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Keep the feast. Okay, this is even a command by the Apostle Paul, but the Christians still don't do it. They're still totally ignorant and blind by the Pope and the Vatican Church. Even though they're Protestant, they're supposed to be separate. The Protestants never restored the feast, guys. Okay, unleavened bread of sincerity or purity of truth. So that's what you do every year. Okay, that's what you should do, but many of you are not, and that's why teachings like this are strange to you. But we saw that Pentecost, okay, many of the denominations are Pentecostal, but they don't know anything about the actual feast of Pentecost. Yes, there's a feast. It actually happened. Okay, it's called the Feast of Weeks in Shavuot. So we saw in the law first mentioned that it was the feast, the Hag, of harvest, or weeks, Shavuot, of the first fruits of your labors, the wheat harvest, okay? And then it says, on the day after the Sabbath, during unleavened bread, you add 50 days, okay? So this is in Leviticus 23 when it tells us when the feast takes place. So Penta means 50, and you count 50 days in the Sabbath that's during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then you count 50 days to come to this feast. So it's called the Feast of First Fruits. These are the first fruits in Ezekiel 44:30. And this is the 144,000, Revelation 14:4. They are first fruits. And you shall keep the Passover, the feast, Hag, Shavuot, of weeks. Okay, so this verse here is talking about two different feasts. You have Passover and the feast, Hag, of Shavuot, weeks. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. So what this means, guys, is that this is a change. So in the millennium, unleavened bread is eaten the 7 days of Shavuot. Now, normally in Leviticus 23:17, in the Torah, the bread that was eaten was leavened. Okay, there was leavened bread. There was yeast in the bread. And that was the ordinance at that time. But in the millennium, that changes, and it's unleavened bread that is to be eaten. Okay? And again, Pentecost was kept by the apostles, which is the day of Pentecost. It's the day the church, ecclesia, began in Acts chapter 2. Paul also kept the Feast of Pentecost, or at least attempted to get to Jerusalem for Pentecost, and he describes that in Acts 20:16 and 1 Corinthians 16:8. So we're just pointing out that the early church did keep the feasts. Then we have the Feast of Ingathering, or called the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. Okay, so a tent or a booth is a sukkah, and plural is Sukkot. And it's called the Feast of Ingathering at the year's Tekufa, or the bringing out. So we showed you in the previous video how the Tekufa is the fall equinox. And so this feast should be close to that, okay? And it's called Tabernacles or Sukkot. And, of course, we see that in the Millennium. So in the Millennium, in the 7th month, in the 15th day of the month, at the feast Hag of 7 days. So all of these feasts are 7 days long. And then we get to the Sabbaths. So we've seen the Feast of Passover, Feast of Shavuot, the Feast of Ingathering. Oh, actually, I didn't read this. This is really important. Of course, in the Millennium, it says, all nations shall go up and worship the King, Melech, Yahweh Sabaoth. So this is the Lord of hosts. Okay, so they're going to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Aleph Tav feast of Tabernacles. So this is making it clear that the Feast of Tabernacles is going on during the Millennium. This is Zechariah chapter 14, verses 16 through 19. Now I want you to notice I've put some things here that are really important for us to understand. So it is Christ who is both the King. It says Jerusalem is the place of the King. And he is Yahweh. He is Yahweh Shavuot. And it says to keep Shema Aleph Tav. So remember how he's Alpha and Omega in the Greek in the book of Revelation. Well, this is an untranslated word, and an Aleph and a Tav, and it comes right before Hag, feast. So it's the Aleph Tav's feast, guys. It's not a Jewish feast. It's Yahweh's feast. And not only that, Alpha and Omega is Yahweh. You can see that right here. He is the King. He is Yahweh, Shavuot. They will keep the Aleph Tav, Alpha and Omega feast. You got that? I think that was just 3 languages all at once. The Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. Now the nations, it's amazing. During the Millennium, the nations still won't listen and obey everything, guys. So if you don't listen, all right, it means you're going to be, if you don't obey God, if you don't listen, you don't prepare, it means you're going to be in the outskirts of the kingdom. All right, so like, for example, you know, you might be an American, you may not prepare yourself for the Millennium, you may end up in Egypt. Because then it says, okay, there's people in Egypt and they won't come for the feast. And so they'll be subject to a plague, there'll be no rain, okay? So we don't want to be in Egypt, all right? We don't want to be in Ethiopia. We don't want to be in India. We want to be close. We want to be in the promised land, man. But it's telling us, the instructions are telling us about being still there's people that still won't obey God, even though the devil is incarcerated for 1,000 years. So there's still plagues. There's still people that will not obey Yeshua. It's amazing. And then, of course, the Sabbath continues, and as we told you, the Sabbath is in the law first mentioned, or we talked about when he came down on Mount Sinai, the Sabbath is in the Ten Commandments, the fourth commandment, keep the Sabbath. 6 days you shall work, the seventh day shall be a rest. And then it says, my signs shall you keep for a sign. Okay, some people say that the sign of the Sabbath, okay, this is our protection. This is the sign. This is even the sign on the forehead, okay? And it talks about this holy Sabbath sign in Ezekiel chapter 20. Now, Ezekiel chapter 20, I'm just going to reference here, guys, but it talks about some of the things we're mentioning where some of the laws were instituted based on their sins. And it says that they did not enter the promised land because they polluted the Sabbath. That's Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 16. And as well, guys, the whole book of Hebrews, I forget if it's Hebrews chapter 3 or chapter 4, it talks about how they entered not because of unbelief. Guys, the Christians are doing the same behaviors the Jews you can read in the Old Testament. Okay, it's all the same. It's same idolatry, same disobeying God. Everything is the same. Okay, so many are not going to enter the promised land. And when it talks about the promised land, that is a specific territory, a specific area, okay, around the size of modern-day Israel. It's a little bigger than that, but approximately. But how many people can you fit in that? You see what I'm saying? That's why people are going to end up in Egypt and Ethiopia and in India, the outskirts. Okay, why? Because they polluted the Sabbath. But remember, in the Millennial Temple, the east gate is open on the Sabbath, and the people shall worship Yahweh. And then, again, in the New Testament, Christ admonished us, pray that your escape be not in the winter, nor on the Sabbath. Why? Why is the Sabbath day important? This is, written to Christians. Well, there's some Christians, there's some believers in Yeshua that are keeping the Sabbath. And there's a woe to them. Or pray that you don't make your escape on the Sabbath, because we don't want to break the Sabbath. That's Matthew chapter 24 and verse 20. And additional to that, guys, the 7-year Shemitah, or the 7-year cycle of letting the land rest, in the Jubilee will also be instituted in the Millennium. It's called the Year of Liberty in Ezekiel 46, verse 17, part of the law first mentioned, Exodus 23, verse 10. Now, we also want to show you at various points what time it is in the Enoch calendar. So first you must know the day of the week is the fourth day of the week. Fourth day of the week is a Wednesday. We are still in the fourth month. Okay, the fourth month, and the first week of the fourth month is where you have typically the summer solstice. Okay, so in month 4, and we're coming to a close of the month. We're at the 29th day of the fourth month. Okay, so as we look, and just to explain where the feasts are, okay, in the first month, in the spring, the first month, on the 14th day of the first month is Passover. Okay, then you can see Passover is the 14th day. There's a Sabbath here, and then this is first fruits. Okay, so it's from this day, you count 50 days, and then you can also count the Sabbaths 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and then the next day is Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. So that takes place in the third month, and the day 8. So the 8th day of the third month is the Feast of Weeks. And then we have the 7th month, and then the feast there. Okay? Concludes it, guys. This is part of our playlist on show them the design, show them the pattern. Okay, we're doing this as a study to look at the future 1,000-year reign of Christ in the millennium. But not only that, how do we enter rest, as it says in Hebrews? How do we enter that promised land. Okay, how do we enter that promise? And so, guys, we're going to go through more details. Please watch the 2 previous videos. We spent so much time to explain the structure of the temple itself, is a sundial, is a calendar, so that these feasts that we're going over, we would be on the right time. Okay? And so you can see certain things in it that you will not find if you follow the moon. So all the moon people, I ask you, look at the temple, show me 3 witnesses in the Millennial Temple that prove your moon calendar. I know one, and that's all you'll find. You won't find any numbers, you won't find any of it. So, we're on the right calendar, okay? These are the feasts, and we're doing this to enter rest, enter the future, okay? It is Christ, He has opened the door for us into the temple. He said, we'll make you pillars in the temple. You'll no more go out. But guys, I'm doing this all so that you understand. I don't know if you can see that one there or this one here, but the blood is the blood of the Lamb, is the blood of Christ, okay, that will defeat anything that's going on in the world. Amen? So please watch the playlist, and as we say, fear God. Give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. Worship Him that made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and the fountains of waters. Amen.